Dan Tokar here at the Willow Forge in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, with Xena, the warrior kitten, the shop cat, new cat, who insists upon being picked up and played with from time to time. Anyway, today on a Blacksmith's Dictionary, I thought I'd talk about the infrastructure, a word that seems to be kind of popular in the news these days. The blacksmiths and the iron industry were part of the infrastructure in colonial and federal era America, say the 1780s, 90s, 1800. Because people have this idea that blacksmiths were just in a little shop by themselves and they weren't really part of a greater economy. But I know enough of the history and the economics of how these things ran that, well, maybe you'll be interested. At least you'll get a chance to check up on Xena here. She continues to help me in my talks. Anyway, you have in an agricultural America a need to have guys fix and make things for the farms. And the general rule of thumb that I've found looking at these things is that in that or just very beginnings of American industrial development, there were about one blacksmith for every 300 people. And I should correct that and say one blacksmith shop for every 300 people, because you typically had a shop that had 3 or 4 people in it. The blacksmith, his journeymen and apprentices, and occasional helpers. And they predominantly did agricultural kind of work. Wagons, plows, carriages, domestic things, the sorts of things you need to keep a farm running or a household running when you couldn't just go out and buy things. 300 people is actually about 50 farms, because there was an average of about 6 people on the average farm back then. They tended to have large families and need a lot of help. So if you want to break it down, you have 50 farms, 50 average farms, and 1 blacksmith shop. That's about the ratio. So you need a lot of blacksmiths, a lot of blacksmith shops to take care of even a small community. You're not going to have just 1 blacksmith taking care of a large town. There's also some specialization. Some people are making cutting tools, woodworking tools, more than they are doing agricultural things like plows. Okay, but then where does the iron come from? They did recycle every little piece of metal that came into a shop back then. There's Xena again. She wants to get picked up again. All she sees is that I'm standing here talking, and that's her cue to get picked up. Anyway, so you have this blacksmith shop that's supporting the 50 farms, so he's going to, on average, use up about 1,000 pounds of iron in the course of a year. And a fair amount of that is going to be recycled iron from the community, where people will trade iron back to the blacksmith or sell iron to somebody else who sells it to the blacksmith. And this is why you get things like strap hinges made out of recycled horseshoes and things like that. But still, you need a lot of new metal as well. So where did that come from? This is the era of the charcoal iron furnaces, where they would get bog iron or iron ore locally, cut down trees, make charcoal, and have an iron plantation, as they were sometimes called. These are the kind of operations that would have either a land grant or have the company buy up about 5,000 acres of forest near a good water source, so they could have a water-powered blower to run the furnace, the blast furnace, And some reasonable amount of iron ore in the area, and it's not really that hard to come up with that much iron ore. A surprising number of places in the eastern part of the United States have iron deposits that are close enough to the ground that you could basically dig something that looks like a road cut into a hillside and get tons of iron ore out. It's more a problem of what quality the iron ore is, because typically bog iron might be fairly high in iron content, but it's more of a limited resource, whereas the stuff that you mine has a greater volume but tends to be a little lower quality. And also because of the production methods, they're not getting all of the iron out. You have an economic return of how much iron can you economically extract from the ore. And this is why you hear figures of 15 or 20% of the weight of the iron ore actually turns into iron at the end. So you need as much as 6 tons of iron ore to be able to get 1 ton of cast iron or pig iron out the other end. And then you can process that into wrought iron to send to the blacksmith shops, or cast it into pots and pans and other things at the furnace. So how did all of this work from the furnace's viewpoint? They've got an operation that, again, a typical furnace in this era has 200 people working there, and they produce about 300 tons of iron a year. And if you're using 1,000 pounds a year for an average for a blacksmith shop, this roughly means that one of those iron furnaces is supplying enough iron for about 600 blacksmith shops. And if you extend that out to the number of people that this is supporting, it's about 180,000 people are getting their metal from one furnace. Xena is playing games here on the anvil. You can't see her. She's being quite cute. Anyway, we've also got a thunderstorm moving in. So if you hear some rumbling, it's probably just the thunderstorm. Anyway, so what do you need to make a furnace like that produce 300 tons of iron in a year? And what are those 200 people that work at the furnace doing? Well, because they're charcoal-fired furnaces, you've got 70 to 90 people that are doing nothing but cutting down trees all day long, every day. That's just their job, is to turn trees into cordwood that will then be turned into charcoal that will fire the furnace. So again, our typical furnace, you've got maybe 80 guys that are cutting down trees, and they're cutting down, I mean clear cutting old growth, about an acre of woods a day. And they're getting maybe 50 cords of firewood out of an acre. And you've got another 30 guys called colliers, who are guys who know how to take the wood that's dried for a bit, because you're always using the wood that was cut a while before. They would split it into fairly easy to manage pieces and stack it, make a mound, and fire to make charcoal. So you got 30 guys who are doing nothing but splitting and stacking dry wood in a mound and covering it with dirt and burning it to make enough charcoal. And again, for a furnace that size that's making about 1 ton of iron a day, they need something on the order of 50 cords of firewood to be turned into charcoal every day. Okay? Same time, you've got about 30 people who are digging the ore mining, and they're also crushing it because in order to operate in the furnaces like they had back then, you had to have the iron ore crushed to the fineness of either rice-sized to corn-sized grains. You could have some fines, but the majority of the ore was broken up until it was about the size of rice at the small end, and at the big end about the size of a corn kernel. So there's another 30 guys. And then you had Teamsters. And it doesn't mean like the Teamsters Union, but that was the word for the wagoners, the guys who actually took the ore and the charcoal that were being made at other parts of the operation to the furnace. And they had 30 guys who did nothing but run teams of horses and wagons to carry all of this stuff to the furnace. So you end up at the furnace only having about 30 guys who actually ran the furnace. You had all of these other guys that were in support. Now, the economics of this are a fairly narrow run thing. A ton of pig iron, say in 1800, is worth, well, they had ups and downs in commodities like we do today. A ton of pig iron was anywhere from $35 to $50 a ton. And the finished bar iron, like you'd have in a blacksmith shop, would generally run about twice the value of the pig iron, because it would take more fuel and more labor to convert the pig iron into wrought iron bar stock. You'd have to run either big hammers, rolling mills, slitting mills, things like that. Lots of labor to turn the pig iron into bars. But just on the production end of making the iron in the first place, you've got, I got to remember the figure. It's about 15,000 man days of labor to produce 300 tons of pig iron. And if you want to break that down into a per worker average per furnace per day, it works out to somewhere between 30 to 40 pounds of iron per worker per day is what they were producing. Give or take. And if you look at the values of the finished product and the labor costs, they typically were only making a margin of 5 to 10% profit on making this iron. So you're paying, you got a lot of capital tied up, and your return is somewhere between 5 to 10%. At least on the production of iron. But the other thing that they're producing is cleared land, because forest wasn't looked upon as being very valuable. There was so much old growth forest still available. Nobody really considered it to be of much value, because you could get one piece of forest or another for like $5 an acre. You could get an acre of ground that was in old growth forest back then. So wood was cheap, but what was expensive was cleared farmland, because somebody would have to clear the trees and pull the stumps out of this old growth before you could turn it into a farm. So part of the profit of an iron furnace was converting forest land into farmland, that when they would accumulate enough cleared land from their operation, they would sell it off. It's kind of inconceivable by today's thinking, but cleared farmland was worth quite a bit more than the same ground with 300-year-old trees on it. Isn't that right, Xena? Xena's going to help me tell this story. So anyway, right after the revolution in the United States, where let's say 1780, we've got about 4 million people in the United States. And if you take the average of, say, maybe 200,000 people being supported by each of those iron furnaces, uh, uh, you end up needing about 20 furnaces to supply the entire United States with all of the iron they need. And depending on the vagaries of the economy, that's actually sort of what was running at any given time. You had bigger and smaller operations. So, but the actual number of productive furnaces at any given time was pretty consistent with that level of need in the economy, that if you had too many furnaces, the value of the iron would drop below the production cost and somebody would go out of business, and this would raise the price enough so that the other guys, the other iron furnaces could survive. So in an economy like that, you couldn't have much more than 20 to 30 iron furnaces of that size working in any given year and have them actually make enough money to stay in business. The other end of this, which surprises people when you actually run the math forward, is that means that the average American at that time was only using 2 to 3 pounds of iron per year. And just to give you a clue, currently it's about 3,000 pounds per person per year. So we consume about 1,000 times as much steel per person per year as they did in, say, 1790, when the first census came out. Is that right, Xena? If I got the story right. Look at that. She's going to help me. Anyway, I don't know if this is something you wanted to know about or not, but it's what I could do today because I banged up my finger and I've had other things get in the way of the other projects that I've wanted to do videos on. So if you're wondering where the videos are on things like the Ferguson rifle and other projects, just say I am working on them, but some things take a lot longer than you can ever imagine to get all of the things together, and finding the time to do it, and the weather has not helped until recently. And of course I've had to chase Xena, which has slowed me down a little bit. But anyway, don't worry, I plan on having some hit things with hammer videos pretty soon, and have lots of ideas for things that I think are accessible to the average blacksmith today that you can try out in your own shop. But look at this. What are you doing? All right. Anyway, I think that's enough for now. Bye. Bye, Xena.